Hi, everyone. My name's Stacey Jibb, and I'm the Manager of Agriculture and Rural Economic Development with the region of Durham. We're really happy to have you here joining us today. And on behalf of our partners, the Regional Municipality of York and the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this vertical farming webinar series. So today's module is the third of 4, and it's part of our Vertical Farming 101 webinar series. So before we really get into the presentations, I'm just going to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. So we would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we'll meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures, such as the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. All right, so we have partnered with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs and York Region to plan and deliver this timely series. We've heard from many investors and potential farm operators and stakeholders that they want to learn more about this evolving topic and how they can start their own businesses. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Mina Hassan Ali, the agri-food specialist with York Region.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacey, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are also very excited to host this webinar with our partners. As you know, the purpose of this series is really to provide new and aspiring vertical farmers with some best practices and how-to strategies on setting up a vertical farm. So we've had a lot of interest with more than 400 registrations from across Ontario, Canada, and definitely even some global audience, as you can see from the chat, which I think really just speaks to how important this topic is. So please note that we are recording this webinar and a copy of it will be made available to you for reference and posted on our YouTube channel. So at York Region's York Link YouTube, as well as Region of Durham's YouTube channel. Now, if I can please ask Larry to bring up a Zoom polling question for our audience. This is just to see how many, stakeholders and what's the representation of the stakeholders that we have today. So today's webinar is really going to focus on a very high-level overview of permits and approvals processes for setting up a vertical farm from a land use, building code, and wastewater perspective. We're also very excited that we have 2 businesses here with us today to share with us their experiences in getting permits and approvals. And we will also be sharing information with you on an upcoming indoor agriculture research project, which is being led by University of Guelph students. So you'll hear directly from them as well in the end. In terms of the process for today's session, we'll go through each of the presentation, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. At that point during the webinar, or at any point during the webinar, you can submit your questions through the chat function, and we'll make note of that. If we can also please request all the participants to stay muted until the Q&A period, please and thank you. And if you're just joining us, introduce yourself in the chat function. It's a great opportunity to connect virtually with the others that are joining in and that are also very interested in this topic. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Fady Al-Daoud. He's the greenhouse vegetable specialist with OMAFRA. Dr. Fady has a PhD from the Department of Biology at McMaster University with a specialization in molecular plant pathology. His portfolio includes vegetables grown in the greenhouse and vertical farms, as well as greenhouse and indoor cannabis production. So he works very much in collaboration with the producers, researchers, and industry partners to advance the controlled environment agriculture in Ontario. So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, and over to you, Dr. Fady.
Thanks very much, Nina. Thanks for the introduction. Very happy to be your moderator today. As Mina said, we have a great lineup of speakers. I won't take up too much time reiterating what she already mentioned about their topics and subject matter. Just to remind everybody, again, drop your questions in the chat and I'll make note of them. We will go through the presentations first and then a question and answer period afterwards. So I'll keep track of the questions and hopefully get a nice discussion with our panelists in the Q&A. So I won't take up any more time here. We'll go straight to our first presenter. Jocelyn Beattie is with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Jocelyn will be talking to us about high-level land use planning considerations. Jocelyn is a rural planner with the ministry, as I mentioned, and she has been in this position since October 2016. In her role, she provides support in interpreting and implementing provincial policies relating to prime agricultural areas, covering both Northwest and Central East regions of Ontario. Before coming to the ministry, she developed research projects on food insecurity in small communities, as well as Indigenous participation in collaborative land use planning. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Fady. I just want to get a thumbs up. You can see my PowerPoint, okay? Thank you.
Yeah,
it's just showing your presenter view, Jocelyn, so you just have to do that little trick.
Okay. That's okay, Carolyn?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to provide a bit of a high-level perspective and some thoughts on the provincial planning side of things, and as well as some local planning tools that one might encounter when working their way through the planning process. So I want to highlight first that Ontario operates in what we call a policy-led planning system. So this is a way of protecting matters of provincial interest through established legislation, so the Planning Act, as well as policy. So the key policy document that applies to all planning decisions across the province is the provincial policy statement. And this establishes the minimum standard of policy across the province. However, most planning decisions are made at the local level. So municipalities are tasked with implementing provincial policy into their local planning documents as well as local planning decisions. So when we look at the provincial policy statement, definitions of agricultural uses are really only coming into play in reference to the rural lands in municipalities as well as prime agricultural areas. There isn't a reference to urban agriculture within the provincial policy statement. But I do want to highlight these considerations within that rural area. So it permits agricultural uses, agriculture-related, on-farm diversified uses, and as well as normal farm practices in accordance with provincial standards. So we have a guidance document that has been created by OMAFRA. It's called the Guideline on Permitted Uses in Ontario's Prime Agricultural Area. And this is a document that is implemented through the provincial policy statement, and it provides a bit more detail on what these defined terms are. So agricultural uses, agriculture-related, and on-farm diversified uses. The guideline provides a range of examples of these types of uses, but I would say more importantly, it establishes the criteria that would be considered in considering and evaluating uses that are brought forward. And a key role of this guideline is establishing these criteria and clarifying the defined terms, but also making sure that agricultural uses remain the principal use within prime agricultural areas and minimize the removal of land from production while allowing many opportunities for uses that are compatible with and related to agriculture. So agricultural uses are key to this discussion. So these are uses that comprise of farms and farmlands that produce agricultural products and are undertaken with the expectation of gain or reward. And these include growing of crops, raising of livestock, other animals for food, fur, or fiber, on-farm buildings and structures. So there's many examples of existing types of agricultural uses that are traditionally housed in structures, so greenhouse production, mushroom farms, livestock facilities. The provincial policy statement also protects all types, sizes, and intensities of these uses in accordance with provincial standards. So we would have to consider other existing pieces of legislation, as well as local zoning bylaw requirements that may apply as long as they consider the bolstering of normal farm practices. So the next few slides, I'll just highlight some planning tools that one might encounter in the planning approval process. So two key documents are the official plan and the zoning bylaw. The vast majority of municipalities across the province will have these documents in place. The official plan is a really important tool. It helps to set the high-level policy direction that would apply within an individual municipality. And then the zoning bylaw would then be that next step, which details how land is used, the size and dimensions of structures, lot coverage. It encompasses a wide variety of things in that regard. And these will be quite different depending on which municipality you're working with. Another tool to be aware of is what is called site plan control. And it's a planning tool that can be used to address things that are not as easy to address within a zoning bylaw. And it's really getting to a site-specific requirements for an individual location. And municipalities can implement this tool by passing site plan control bylaws. And this will dictate where and when the tool can apply. And it can address a range of issues such as the location of buildings, traffic, access, egress, drainage, outdoor storage, this type of thing. Agricultural uses are typically exempt from site plan control. However, it's not uncommon to see municipalities use this type of tool in terms of establishing larger greenhouses and this type of thing. And decisions on site plan control are often delegated to the staff level, so it can be a bit more of a streamlined process and can help avoid the need to go through an official plan or zoning bylaw amendment process. Municipalities may also have bylaws passed under the Municipal Act, and these bylaws can help address things such as noise, lighting, hours of operation. Municipalities do have to be aware of protection for normal farm practices, which are included under the Farming and Food Production Protection Act. Next are building permits, and my colleague Vicki will be speaking a bit more about this, but I just want to highlight that building permits are required before new construction, addition, replacement, among other things. And the Ontario Building Code is establishing the design and construction standards in order to meet a range of things, specifically health and safety, as well as other considerations and objectives such as resource conservation. For farm buildings, the National Farm Building Code is also coming into play, and building permits will only be issued if the zoning bylaw is implemented and any other requirements under the code. Minimum distance separation is a tool that would not apply to vertical farm type uses, as this tool is only applied to livestock facilities and anaerobic digesters. Just wanted to flag that as well. So I did mention at the start that urban agriculture is not, it's not really contemplated within the existing provincial policy statement. Although, because we have policies that are moving towards more of a consideration of an agricultural system approach, I think there's ways to consider and bolster this type of agriculture. So the system is defined as a productive agricultural land base, as well as what we call the agri-food network. And this includes a range of infrastructure, services, and other assets that are vital to the sustainability of the sector. And OMAFRA is encouraging municipalities to plan for this systems approach to support both more traditional agricultural sectors as well as emerging elements of the sector. And elements of the agricultural system are often located within the urban area, and there are opportunities to kind of help to plan for more of these urban agricultural opportunities. Some kind of preliminary observations that we're seeing is that the majority of vertical farms are locating in industrial and urban type areas. And this is likely to be expected because these locations are likely more appropriate than more of an agricultural context for several reasons. That proximity to customers, so being able to market products as locally produced, and also helping to bridge that transportation need to making sure goods get to market as efficiently as possible. And also the issue about making sure that there's adequate utilities and services such as water, wastewater, transportation, both of goods, but also of employees that will work at the location. And also this value of having these types of uses in areas where there's not a traditional agricultural industry, so urban areas, maybe more remote areas, or areas that lack arable land. And I just wanted to put a plug in because I'm excited to see that there is some research starting with a student group out of the University of Guelph, and looking at these best practices that are hopefully out there in terms of controlled environment agriculture. And I would say there's not a lot of formal guidance on this topic, so I think this research is very timely, and OMAFRA really supports and encourages engagement in this project, which you will hear more from later. Okay, so I think I'm passing it back to Fady. And I'll stop
very much, Jocelyn. Thanks a lot. Great, thanks a lot for that. So we'll go on to our next speaker. Please, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat, and as I mentioned, we'll address them later on. So our next speaker is Vicki Hilborn from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and she'll be talking to us about some different aspects as well. Vicki Hilborn is a professional engineer who works as a team lead for the Innovation Engineering and Programs Delivery Unit at the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. She received her Bachelor of Applied Sciences at the University of Waterloo and her Master's of Applied Sciences at the University of Guelph. Welcome, Vicki.
Thanks, Fady. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the environmental approvals that are necessary for vertical farms. The thing I really wanted to stress was that these approvals can be quite complicated and time consuming. And anytime that you have expectations within your project plan of how long these approvals are going to take, I always encourage people to think about a little bit more time, because often we underestimate how much time that these items take to obtain. And they are critical because you often can't move forward in your building permit, or at least the occupancy of your building, until these approvals are obtained. So in order to do that well, you need to assemble an experienced team. This team could include the people preparing your approvals, as well as your builders and the engineering team that is all together to make sure they're all communicating and trying to do things right the first time, and avoiding any mistakes that will cause delay in the approvals. One thing here that to add to your team is to consider doing a pre-consultation with the Ministry of Environment or with your municipality to confirm the approvals that you would need, and that they can be a pretty integrated part of your team if necessary, to make sure that any changes that you're making to your project or anything like that goes along, that you have incorporated that into your approvals plan. And then you want to connect with your team as early as possible into the planning process and as often as possible. And the really key thing here is early, and particularly with the Ministry of Environment as well as municipality, to make sure you have a really good, solid understanding of what you will need and the process to obtain it. And then we always encourage people to talk to other growers or farmers about their experiences putting in a vertical farm. And we have a really good example here today of some growers that have put in operations into urban areas, my understanding is, and basically understanding their process. But it's really important to know that it's experiences will vary between every municipality and every area within a municipality sometimes. And so I would never take their experiences as something that for sure is the way that you are going to experience it, but at least gives you some guidance on some of the tips and tricks and the areas that you might want to be aware of. So some of the approvals that we're talking about is permission to actually build the operation. So the building permits from conservation authorities where required. These are typically only if you're building within a floodplain, but it's always a good practice that if you're at all are questioning if you're anywhere within a conservation area's reaction, that you can contact them and they will confirm where you are and if they need to have any involvement in the approval process. It's also important to consider the ability to access infrastructure, so water, electricity, natural gas, or alternatives to those. And we already spoke, this is often why vertical farms are in industrial areas, because you have access to this infrastructure. But if you're going into a more rural space, it's really important to really consider if you'll have access to these options. And then if you are, particularly if you're in a rural environment, the thoughts around collecting and storing stormwater. So there is more, especially if you're going for a really big focus area, big site plan, that you will need to consider how you're going to collect the stormwater and store it and discharge it ultimately into the environment. And you will need an approval there if you're going to discharge it into the environment. Overall, you'll need a plan on how you're going to deal with solid waste, such as garbage, particularly if you're in a rural environment, how you're going to manage irrigation water so that irrigation water cannot be mixed with the stormwater, how you're going to manage wastewater in your facility. So if sometimes people can get access to water and not to sewage, and so making sure you have good, adequate access to sewers, and then stormwater, how you're going to access it, or the stormwater management system in the infrastructure. The big thing here, and I kind of alluded to this before in the previous slide, each project is really unique and you may need different or new approvals depending on how you're working within your particular municipality or for your project. And so just really be careful to make sure you understand all the approvals that you need as early as possible. So for the building permits, it is helpful to know, as I said before, to talk to municipality early on in the process and make sure you understand well what their timelines are for applications. This can really vary amongst different municipalities. So really think about the timelines and how they match with your project. If you're located on a farm, you'll likely need a farm building permit approved by the local municipality. And if you're not located on a farm, you'll likely need a large building permit. The difference here is that there are different building requirements for farm buildings as required to municipalities. So if you were to build exactly the same building in a property that would meet the definition and allow you to build a farm building, then you might have, it might be less expensive as compared to an industrial area. However, there are disadvantages and advantages, of course, to everything. And building an industrial area often means you don't have to build the same infrastructure. You have access to your customers and all those other elements that Jocelyn spoke to. So it is really careful to consider not just the cost of the building, but all those auxiliary pieces that you'll have to consider if you built on a farm area. Water is a big piece there, particularly if you build in a rural area. Often you will not have access to municipal water, and you would have to get access to other types of water, which can be challenging and may not even be possible for that site. And I spoke to this a little bit about the Conservation Authority. Basically, you will need to confirm with the Conservation Authority if you're in their area and if you'll need their permits to build. Some of the infrastructure to consider and the permits related to them. So water, so if you are going to be pulling more than 50,000 liters per day of water from the environment, so that includes a well, that can include surface water. So if you were collecting your storm water and putting it into your operation, you would need to have a permit to take water from the Ministry of Environment. And the water needs, of course, will vary substantially by crops and the amount that you're recycling the water. So this is something that's really critical to consider. And this is a big reason why often we see vertical farms in industrial areas, because it takes a lot away, at least some of the questions are around water access. We don't talk about it here, but a thing as well is quality of the water. Water from municipalities are consistently high quality, whereas if you're getting water from the environment, especially surface water, it can vary substantially in volume and in quality throughout the year. Electrical is also a big thing to consider. Often you'll need three-phase power to run a larger system such as a vertical farm. And if you're using anything like artificial lighting, which I understand is quite common in vertical farming because you are in a non-transparent building, that's a huge amount of power that you're going to be drawing, and many rural locations cannot support that amount of electricity. There are, of course, alternatives such as generators or something else that you could use to provide that power, but it can be a bit challenging if you aren't able to access it directly from the grid. And then access to natural gas or propane, you will be needing to heat your operation. Natural gas is the most typical way to do that heating, and in industrial areas you'll normally have access to natural gas, whereas if in your rural area you might have to use propane, which can be extremely cost prohibitive, as well as you have the issue sometimes with supply. Some of these other things here around the water piece. So I spoke to this a bit, but just getting into the details a bit. So stormwater, particularly, sorry, instead of saying greenhouses, it should say vertical farms, but it might be necessary for you to collect, treat, and discharge stormwater. And these activities do require approval through the MECP. You only require an approval if you are directly discharging yourself to the environment. So if you're in an industrial area, they often have stormwater collection systems and that you could connect to, and so you wouldn't have to directly manage that, and that's a huge advantage to working in an industrial area. Greenhouse nutrient feed water, we haven't actually received any requests for that I'm know of a vertical farm wanting to apply their greenhouse nutrient feed water to land, but basically this is an option for a land application of greenhouse nutrient feed water, basically the recycled water that's been used to feed the plants, and allows you to land apply instead of having to discharge it either through wastewater or through another means. And so this does require an approval through OMAFRA. It might be worth considering if you are looking for some lower cost options to manage land. You would need access to farmland to do this option, but that might be a good option for many. Wastewater, sewage and wastewater generating sites, you will need to figure out how you're going to manage that. Again, if you're in an industrial area, typically you'll have access to sewage, which would help really manage this issue, but there are costs sometimes from bylaw charges related to wastewater if it has high organic concentrations in it. And so sometimes it's still worth pre-treating your wastewater before it goes into the sewer. It really depends on your system. And so that's something that's really important to talk to with your engineers or your other building support people, determine if any treatment before you go into the sewer is necessary for your particular municipality to avoid any kind of bylaw charges. If you're in a rural area, sometimes it's possible you're trying to manage the wastewater through the septic tank. This can be challenging if you have a fairly big operation with many staff on site, and it really depends on the volume. So if you have a certain volume, you need to get an approval from the Ministry of Environment. And if it's a smaller volume, you need to get approval through your municipality. And so this is something really to figure out who you want, who you'll need to work with, and determining if this is the best outcome for you. Septic tanks, as people have worked with it, can be sometimes a bit temperamental, and if it's not working, you need to figure out a different option for your wastewater. And so this is again another good advantage of why going into industrial parks is a bit can be a bit easier for these operations. And then finally, solid waste. And the big advantage of being in an agricultural area is that you can manage your agricultural waste through a land application if it meets certain criteria. So it is something to consider if there is ability to access land and manage agricultural waste if it meets those definitions. For solid waste, garbage, anything like that, of course, cannot be managed through land application, would need to be managed through a landfill. And so making sure that you understand the best way to deal with that at the lowest price is important too. So just overall in closing, I try to kind of allude to it here. Environmental and other approvals are complicated, and you can make them happen, and but they do take time. And you want to make sure that you're working with the right people to avoid any complications and any mistakes along the way. These mistakes can really cost you a lot of time if you realize you have to do a certain kind of study, or you have to do something that takes a bit of engineering in order to get the approval. And so you really want to build in extra time around these areas, and you don't want to get stuck with waiting for an approval to come through. So start early, have a good team that you're working with, check in often with them as the person that might be owning this operation. You don't want to just to make sure depend on them to do it. Check in often to make sure you're getting to those approvals and identifying any barriers there. We are happy to help in OMAFRA to talk through any kind of these approvals pieces. We can't really force the municipality or anybody else that require you to give an approval, of course, but we can kind of talk you through what you might need, some of the different options that you might have, and we're happy to always do that. So this is my contact information. We have about 15, 20 engineers across the province that can help in different areas in this type of topic. So happy to provide support where we can. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicki. So that was a great start. We had a couple of my colleagues there talking about some rural planning considerations, as well as some considerations for permits and considerations like that for local farmers when they're setting up. So now we're moving on to the second portion, where we'll hear from a couple of vertical farmers who have personal experience navigating municipalities and planning their farm in terms of permits and all that kind of stuff. So our first speaker, first vertical farmer is Karina Biaggi, who's a CEO and co-founder of Hortaliza. Karina is, as I mentioned, the CEO and co-founder of this startup vertical farm with a storefront that is located in downtown Kingsville, Ontario, in southwestern Ontario. Hortaliza was launched in 2021 with a mission of changing people's relationship with food. Karina has a Bachelor of Business Administration degree and held positions in sales and marketing in her corporate career before starting Hortaliza. Welcome, Karina.
Thank you, Fady. Let me just start by sharing my screen. Just thought it would help illustrate our process. So Hortaliza, as Fady mentioned, is a vertical farm store located in downtown Kingsville, so right on Main Street, which is kind of a prime location for any town or city. And the idea was to come up with this space that is both integrates the vertical farm and having a storefront. You can see a little bit of our storefront, so customers could walk in and see the production, see the greens growing, and kind of integrating the industry with the storefront. We focus on growing microgreens. We grow more than 65 varieties at this point. We focus on food diversity, and as mentioned by Jocelyn, there are many reasons for vertical farms in urban space. The proximity to the consumers. We are a direct consumer company. We sell directly to them. So we chose to focus on microgreens, and that is also part of the reason we decided to have a storefront, this space where we could also help educate the customers, not only on vertical farming, but also about microgreens, which is kind of a new product for most consumers. So going straight to our process. I saw in one of the questions, is there a checklist? So back then, our planning phase started in 2020. There was no checklist, not anything specific, like a design path that we could just follow for this sort of idea. It was quite new back then. We did contact OMAFRA, OFA, all the organizations possible, our municipality, the health unit, everyone that we could find information about opening a vertical farm store. Specific to our town, the town of Kingsville, the first call we made, of course, it was for to the planning service department, and the first answer was no, no, no. We launched this business during the pandemic, so there was no open doors. The municipality was closed, so everything had to be done by phone or appointment only. So the first calls was no, 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 and we kind of got the idea, trying to dig deeper into the no's we were getting. Why not? And basically it was around, this is kind of a new concept, so they weren't kind of understanding what we were trying to do. the commercial zoning. So we wanted, and we are located in a central commercial zoning. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And also they question, as many of you might know, Kingsville Leamington is the greenhouse cluster in Canada. So there was also that question, like, why should we have a vertical farm, in this space? So it was kind of a very hard nose at the beginning, but we kept pushing. So we kind of asked and made it happen, like to have with the director of planning, so the planning service department, a first meeting. And we did our research before going there, because we need to remember this is a collaboration, right? And this is it's a new industry, and urban farming is specifically applied to vertical farming is quite new, especially in Canada. So the first thing we did is try to find alignment with the economic development strategic plan for the town of Kingsville. So we understood their goals, and we tried to find the places where we would help the town achieve those goals, like the community-based focus, growing specific business sector, and Kingsville has this agri brand strong here. So we kind of try to explain why having Hortaliza would help them with that specific goal as well. And also to attract and retain a new generation, which is basically us too. Like, we're coming from a different background, coming from different areas, and helping this entire town and this Windsor Essex to bring innovation to the area too. So we started from the economic development idea and how we aligned with their plans. Then we went into presented the concept. So this was like a very long meeting, pretty much 2 hours. So I'm just giving you like brief examples, but we went through specifically how we would run and operate the business. Our idea was always for our locations to use existing buildings, which is going to affect the building permits that Vicki just talked about. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So we showed them our plans, our sketches, like how it would look like within the town, because when we were talking over the phone, or if you don't have anything to present to them, it's kind of a new idea, a new concept, like it's hard for them to imagine how this would look like. We also back then tried to showcase some examples. There are in Ontario and across Canada very towns and cities, they're open-minded and kind of to push for the agenda for urban farming. So we kind of wanted to show some examples, not only in Ontario, but also across the globe, like Farm One in New York, in farm that is coming within the grocery stores. There's Operation Grow, which is a social enterprise in Midland, Ontario. So we wanted to also exemplify that this is coming. So we just wanted to bring the town of Kingsville on board. Like I said, I think it's really important for us to do our own research too, and to understand from an urban planning perspective what their struggles are. So we literally went through reading the entire zoning bylaw. We were trying to be specifically located in central commercial C2 zoning here in the town of Kingsville. So we were reading together the permit uses. So we kind of saw, we could have a grocery store, we could have a retail store. We went to the point where we technically discussed the growing part of what if we were selling houseplants, right? There are many houseplants retail stores, and kind of stretching a little bit the agriculture, the growing method, but it's still, the plants are still growing. So we went really deep, and the director of planning actually got a very big physical book, and we were trying to understand and find ways that would not require changing the bylaw, because we did a little bit of research and saw some cases that where the town had to kind of bring to approval to the town council and approve and change the bylaw. So we were trying to avoid that. So we worked together to find within the existing zoning bylaw where we could be approved. So that's where we are located. So this is a very prime, zone for the town of Kingsville. This is the central commercial, and that's where our first location is. So we worked with them to understand that. The second step, we had a meeting with the mayor, with the CAO, and tried to explain what's in it for the town of Kingsville, which is pretty much pitching the concept again of urban vertical farming, the addition to the current greenhouse industry, because it is an addition. We're not competing, we're just contributing, we're direct to consumer. It's a completely different business model. So there's that point that they had, and why in Kingsville Leamington, we kind of got past that point. We also wanted to help the town of Kingsville lead the way for urban farming. It's not every town that it has, approved urban farmers to start this type of job. So we kind of wanted to, to bring the town of Kingsville to map, and our contribution to the ag tourism and innovation. We've been working together with many on the Culinary Tourism Association, Ontario Grown Food, we're running workshops and tourism events with the town as well to help promote agriculture and tourism. In terms of license and permits, like Vicki was explaining, this was pretty much the approval we got, right? In order for us to be able to operate in zoning C2, we had to have this retail storefront, which was our plan. So it kind of worked out well. It would be a little bit more of a struggle if it was, let's say, a B2B kind of operation with no storefront, or even if it's a direct consumer, but let's say only deliveries or subscription program, so no storefront. I think it would have to have a little bit more convincing, and we understand that it's a prime place, for the town, and they want to, from an urban planning perspective, it makes sense that they want nice retailer stores, nice office, things to attract their own residents to the downtown area, and also tourism. Of course, we had to go to the fire department inspection. In terms of building permit, as I said, from a sustainability perspective, we decided to go, we want to have our locations in existing building, and that also helped with the building permits. And to make it even simpler, we kind of adapt our production plan and our layout, so we wouldn't have to do any major renovations. So we didn't even need a building permit. It was the department gave us the go ahead. And from a health unit perspective, it was kind of a new experience for them as well, because they weren't sure. So we are a farm, so usually health unit is not that involved with that, but because we wanted to have that storefront, we have a report. So we got inspected as a food premise, and if you want to have, process any type of your greens or process anything as a byproduct of your greens, you need a health unit inspection to work as a kitchen as well. So this is pretty much it. Our takeaway from this is also like how we go through it. Everything else is don't take no for an answer, at least not the first 100 no's, and do your own research and dig deep. Try to understand from the town's perspective, the government perspective, and try to see where we can, where you can collaborate and help your own town, your own city, to achieve their own economic development goals. And that's it. I'm open for questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Karina. That was very insightful, I think, for a lot of people to understand what a business like yours went through, especially with a municipality that isn't as familiar with vertical farming. So that was great. So they already have a couple of questions for you, and we'll take that to the end, and we'll move on to our next speaker. Steve Jones is the president and CEO of Local Leaf Farms. Steve has a diverse career that has spanned currency trading of Scotia Capital Markets to becoming a naturopathic doctor and founding Millennium Health Centers. After 7 years at BDO Canada, where he was a national director of marketplace, he joined the Business Development Bank of Canada as a senior partner in the management consulting practice before leaving to start Local Leaf Farms. Local Leaf has a model where he was developing for 5 years. Local Leaf Farms has 2 production facilities in Ontario, one in Barrie and one in Kingston. where they had vastly different experiences navigating the permit and approval process. So I expected to hear a lot about that from Steve. Local Leaf Farms has produce in Longos, Goodness Me, Sobeys, Foodland, and the sweet potato, in addition to food kit providers like Simcoe Harvest. Local Leaf Farms produces a full assortment of leafy greens and herbs for retail partners. Discussions are underway for expanding their sales channels and production models. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much, Fady. You were very diplomatic in saying that I bounced around in careers so much, but what it really translates into landing on the ideal environment of helping your communities, being environmentally sensitive, and being in business. One stat you got wrong was I was planning Local Leaf Farms for 14 years. It started my journey when I was asked to join a cannabis company as a partner. And I famously said at that time, never in my lifetime will cannabis be available for non-medicinal usages. And I got that one really wrong. But it got me looking globally at growing environments. And I started that journey, what is now almost 15 years ago, of planning local lease and having a different model. So thank you for inviting me on. I do have a different perspective. I don't have a PowerPoint. As I said off the top, I plan on freestyling, and I'm glad that I did that because everything that Jocelyn, Vicki, and Karina said, I think I can add some context too. We are a larger scale commercial facility. We do have facilities in Barrie and Kingston. And before we get into discussions about what it's like, what it has been like navigating those two different channels, it really comes down to the positive impact. I saw off the top that Invest Durham is involved in this. What we've witnessed is that, you know, when you open up the financial press a week ago and you see that Walmart signed a $400 million Series E deal with Plenty, you have municipalities that recognize that vertical farming is a forward state for the supply chain of food in Canada. And I can personally say that the large retail brands have made that statement as well. So your economic development departments are saying, we would really love to see that capital flow into our communities. A lot of municipal councils have official plans that are looking to trace innovation. Many of them have identified ag tech and food innovation as an area that they want to focus on. But while that's at the council side and the official plan, there can be a significant disconnect, as the previous presenters have identified, as to how the city planning departments or the building departments understand that sector and or share the vision. So I really congratulate Invest Durham for being involved in that, because there is a significant disconnect, and I'm sure many of the people are going to want to hear about it. Karina did a wonderful job, and I congratulate her well for talking about basically trying to share a new concept to very established processes. It can be extraordinarily difficult, and Karina did a tremendous job at identifying the zoning aspects, which is a significant part of it. Vicki, or Jocelyn, I should say, I'm looking at my notes, indicated that provincial policy statement doesn't have enough meat on the bone for agriculture in an urban setting. And that's a bit of an understatement. And for the people on this webinar, that's going to be an area where they're going to find friction points for a few years, but it's changing as more of us are out there. So my experience has been as diverse as one can experience in two different municipalities as could be. When we were planning this, and when I was planning this for many years, we've had large commercial realtors look across the country, because we intend to have 20 locations within the next 5 years across the country. So we were, of course, looking at what does that navigation process look like in different jurisdictions. There's all the issues about how you manage your wastewater and electrical, but what's the understanding? What's the environment look like? And it's a very diverse environment out there in terms of the interests and the willingness of different municipalities to engage upon vertical farmers. I will state that there are communities that have proactively reached out and said, we would love to have one of your facilities here. And there are others that don't get it, and I dare say might not want to get it for a period of time. So what I can speak to today is what that difference looks like. And I think I can be summarized. I'm not going to speak to zoning because Karina did such a wonderful job on that, but I'll encourage everyone to pay close attention to that issue. I will speak to more the building permit and the planning process. So in Barrie, we did not build. In Kingston, we are a tenant in a new build. So that alone is going to create very divergent issues that very much speak to Vicki's statement about the time and the team that you need. In our case, we've had a large team assembled. We've had mechanical, civil, electrical engineers, we've had architects, we've had project managers, and we've had PhDs at various universities in Ontario, all working with us to put together exactly the type of plan that Vicki spoke to. And I'm not suggesting that everyone needs it, but I am suggesting that you heed Vicki's opinions very closely in that you're going to need to have a very thorough team. The checklist that I saw in the chats here, you're going to want to go through those, and you're going to have to plan for whatever time you think it's going to take. It's going to take longer because in Kingston, you know, we went into production. We did the real estate deal there in March of 2020, just before the lockdown. And while there has been COVID supply chain issues and whatnot, the long story short is we're in the final stages of an occupancy process in Kingston 2 years later. The difference between the two facilities can be summarized as night and day. And perhaps that's a different orientation of an official plan. Perhaps it's a difference of the people that are in the various roles at the planning departments or the building departments, but I think I could summarize it into a few buckets. One is vertical is completely new. We've heard from Jocelyn about ag not really being within official plans for urban environments. So because of that, there's a bit of a gap on the part of planning and building permit inspectors to try to interpret an Ontario building code or municipal bylaws to see how it applies to a sector that they've never come across before. The challenge with that is that they can make assumptions that are inaccurate and are not remotely close to the processes that we have. So true story, I've had an inspector tell us that the fact that we have a wall between our front warehouse and our grow room takes away all of our biosecurity needs. And many of you out there might be chuckling on mute to the notion of that, but that's a reality because they've never come across that before. So there's a tremendous amount of incorrect assumptions. CO2, we will, of course, all use some degree of CO2 production, and that can trigger alarm bells, pun intended, whereby they think that there's a life safety issue there, even though the threshold for CO2 is a third of what the Ministry of Labor allows. And even though there are alarms throughout, you just run into an issue where they haven't confronted it before. So you're going to trigger lots of discussions and the longer period of time that Vicki talked about. The next bucket is that because this is new, you might very well find that you're going to run into an awful lot of changing opinions. True story again is it expense to exchange the air in your warehouse, and after much involvement from many different experts and engineers, forget about it, you don't have to. Now you have to go back and change your drawings because we previously said that you did require that. And I guess the third bucket would be really this notion of what this webinar is about, and that is how different jurisdictions, different municipalities, whether it be under their official plans or their bylaws, have interpreted code in different ways and have different standards that if you don't heed Vicki's advice and ask a lot of questions, very precise questions on the checklist, you might find that you get into a situation where you do a real estate deal, you've got your permits and whatnot, but then they come back and they say, well, in this municipality, and these are true stories again, your emergency corridor has to be much larger than in others, so you're going to lose 500 square feet out of your facility. Or as in the case of something that's occurred this week regarding HVAC condensers that are sitting out front, and inspectors had seen them for 6 months, they then turn around and say, you're going to have to build an acoustic barrier around it, but we can't tell you the sound noise rating that's required. and we're not going to provide any direction around it. And yet an engineer is suggesting you need a rating that would be comparable for the airport, just for an HVAC unit. And every one of these requires you to consult with a vast litany of experts to push back, challenge, because you are creating a new environment. In the case of that story, and I'll look to my other monitor, I brought in an architect from the University of Toronto, and I'm going to read it to you because I think this is relevant for navigating the process. He says, I've never seen a requirement to dampen noise in this fashion. The requirement does not exist in any other municipality of a completed projects in for the past 40 years. It seems to be that the city of blank has a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. I think that statement about a solution to a problem that doesn't exist is in response to a very precise issue, our condensers in one jurisdiction, but it does summarize the challenges of walking through and navigating different locations. Those same units exist in one city. Our exact templated commercial model is already in production in one facility and is simply being implemented in another. And yet, as I've said, there's night and day responses in terms of how city officials from planning through to building, through to bylaws interpret the same set of code in the province and the same systems. What I do see in multiple jurisdictions and what hasn't been brought up thus far is amongst the groups that you should be connecting with should absolutely be the local economic development offices. We've talked about connecting with city buildings, city planning departments, the ministries, all that, of course. But as I've said off the top, Invest Durham is an illustration of many municipalities get it. They want to see this innovative sector grow. They want to see it grow within their municipalities. They want to see the economic benefits from it, the capital, the jobs, the employment. But they vary greatly in terms of how they approach it. So one of the first stops that I would encourage is to also reach out to the local economic development office, because they can be a tremendous benefit at steering your way through this very complex, time-consuming engineering and permit process. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for everyone, and I'm open to taking questions after this webinar by email as well.
That was great. It's a great experience on your part in dealing with multiple municipalities and how things really vary from one jurisdiction to another. So that was very insightful. Hopefully, a lot of the municipality staff that are joining us today hear your message. So let's move on. If you have any questions, just a reminder to drop them in the chat, and I'm keeping track of all of them, and we'll discuss them as the panel reconvenes after our last presentation now. So our last presentation is, let me get my notes here. Last presentation is by a group of students at the University of Guelph. This is a controlled environment agriculture operations research project with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. So we have three master's students joining us from the University of Guelph Rural Planning and Development. Master's students, as I said, Kayleigh Van Bokhorst, Minerva Cancela Stiles, and Aaliyah Bauer are the three master's students in rural planning and development. They're candidates at the University of Guelph and are working on a controlled environment agricultural operations research project, as I said, with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. So thanks a lot for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Just let me know, Kayleigh, if you give me a thumbs up if you can see that all right. Perfect. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Minerva, and my colleagues Kayleigh and Leah and I are Masters of Rural Planning and Development students from the University of Guelph. We're here today to speak to you about our research project and to get you excited about participating in our survey. We are currently conducting a research study with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture on the analysis of rural land use planning best practices affecting controlled environment agriculture operations. Through a scan of recent literature, it has become clear that academic research surrounding the land use planning considerations of controlled environmental agriculture is limited, with the majority focusing on the economic viability and the environmental considerations of these operations.
We're hoping that this project will assist in initiating discussions around CEAs within Ontario municipalities and will provide municipalities with the guidelines to assist them in developing land use policies and planning. The final goal of this project is to develop a best practices guide to identify land use planning best practices employed by rural municipalities regarding CEAs, which will provide next steps and recommendations for municipalities. The main reason why we wanted to join today's webinar was to introduce you to our project and hopefully get some people interested in participating in our surveys.
The purpose of the survey we will be conducting is to gain information on current policy that guides land use planning considerations for CEA operations. We will survey selected Ontario rural municipalities to identify existing CEA land use policies. If you are a business who's experienced starting a CEA operation and you have insight into the land use planning process, it would also be very helpful to hear from you. If you're interested in participating in our upcoming survey, please fill out the form through the link that we'll provide in the chat, and please provide your preferred contact information. The survey will be circulated starting on March 1st. We'll be sending the survey by email with more information about the research. So thank you all very much for your time, and please feel free to reach out to us by using the emails listed on the screen, and that we'll provide in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for the description of your project, and I'm sure there'll be a number of people who'd be happy to be part of your survey and inform your project. So let's invite all the panelists. Sorry, are we running? I guess we're running a poll right now. So that's the end of our presentation, and I believe Larry has another poll to run before we invite our panelists on. Okay. So the first question, and Vicki's not here, but I want to talk to Jocelyn about this if she has some background in the Normal Farm Practices Protection Act and what you're finding about, you know, applying that in an urban setting.
Yeah, it would have been good to get Vicki's perspective on that, because she's been quite involved with the Normal Farm Practice Board side of things, but I have solicited some thoughts from colleagues, and it's fun. It kind of all comes full circle to what Steve kind of ended with, this discussion around the consideration of zoning. So with Normal Farm Practice Board cases, every one of them is going to be kind of heard on their own merits, and they're not precedent setting, but you can kind of look back and glean some insights from previous cases. And there have been decisions through the Normal Farm Practices Board where if zoning has not been in place to permit agricultural uses, then there would be jurisdiction for the board. So those practices would not be protected. So to my knowledge, I don't know if we have cases from an urban area, but I suspect there would be a potential issue if the zoning is not in place to acknowledge those uses. That would be my thoughts there.
Great. Yeah, that's the feedback that I was getting as well from some colleagues on the call, getting direct messages, and that's kind of what Vicki also alluded to, the case by case basis, and it really comes down to zoning. But again, if you have any specific questions about the Normal Farm Practices Act, you can connect with Vicki and her team, and they're very knowledgeable, and they'll let you know. But from what I understand, from what Jocelyn said, it really depends on the zoning of the building. that would come down to. And I haven't heard a lot of issues with complaints from vertical farms, but maybe Karina and Steve can speak to this. Have you guys had any issues with noise or odor? Would be one for cannabis production. Neither of you produces cannabis, but has there been anything along those lines, Karina?
At the beginning, there was a lot of concern and a lot of question, and we were, it was a long question session about, you know, from the municipality specifically at first, and then and also trying to be aware of the community, especially in Kingsville, Leamington, where we're having a lot of discussion regards to lights and odor from the cannabis, and then the lights from all the greenhouses. So in terms of lights, that was one of the questions. The way we are operating right now, it doesn't affect, you know, the residents or the city. So there's no concern on that. If there was, because we are in a retail space, it would be pretty easy to fix. In our case, it's not a greenhouse, so the lights is not necessarily going up. And the times that, like the hours of the day we're using our ground lights is not affecting the town as well. In terms of odor, that's not a problem. There was question, and it goes back to Steve's point, there's a lot of misinformation and wrong assumption. And I think that's our job, is to educate the community, and even, you know, municipality in some cases, like they were concerned about humidity, for example, which is something that for us as growers is like one of the basic that we do for growing conditions. So we handle that pretty well, because for the optimal growing condition for the plants, that's the basic of what we do for us. So for us, it wasn't even a concern, right? So we presented to them with the, that's why I'm saying we went, you know, in the specifics, how a vertical farm is operated to kind of ease those questions. So we haven't had any issues so far.
Okay, great. And I don't anticipate a lot of issues because it is a closed system. Of course, you know, with the odor issue with cannabis, that's a separate issue, and they do handle those things with filters and those kinds of stuff when they are recycling the air. Steve, any comment about the question about normal farm practices act?
Light's not a concern because it's a closed CEA, so they could figure that out. In not just the 2 jurisdictions that I'm in, but in the other 8 that we've been having discussions with, odor comes up in every one of them immediately. There's been a lot of learning from cannabis, but there's been an awful lot of incorrect assumptions. And I dare say that at a city level, their baseline right now is cannabis. So that causes concerns. Odors come up. Security has come up in half of them. And I've turned around and said, look, man, my basil's good stuff, but I don't need a gated security system around it to prevent people from breaking in to steal my basil. But it is out there, and the thinking is definitively there. And noise is a huge issue. This is one that I did reference, that in no jurisdiction in the province has anyone had to put an acoustic barrier around an HVAC condenser that produces barely above the human voice. But predicated upon a site plan, this issue comes up, and the caution for everyone is heeding Vicki's advice well in advance, because they can turn around and say to build a 14-foot gate would cost you $25,000. And it comes from an incoherent place predicated upon an incoherence within the site plan that comes back to not really understanding what you do. So I think the issue of sound and light is just a really emblematic illustration of, we don't know what you're doing. All we know out there is cannabis. You're growing stuff inside, it must be the same as cannabis. There's to Karina's point, a very steep learning curve, not just for producers to educate the consumer or the retail partners, but municipalities on the vast differences.
Great. Maybe we'll move on to the next question, which is a couple of questions came in about checklists. The first person to connect with. So I know Vicki talked about, really talking to the municipalities, and that was echoed by Karina and Steve in terms of the people to talk to and the planning, as well as in economic development. So there seems to be, a lot of outreach that needs to happen from the planning stage to the municipality. But if Karina, if you could just recap again exactly just a couple of the departments that you connected with, and if there was a checklist for you, I know probably not, just because it varies from one operation to the other, but just if you could recap again, those points would be great.
To Steve's point, again, economic development officer, that's one of the first persons you need to connect. Is there alignment of what you're trying to do? Almost 100% of the times it would probably be yes, but go for the economic development department. And that's why we did our research to start our conversation when we approached the planning service department. So go for that person too, because they kind of hold the book for the zoning. Especially if you're trying to be urban farming and be located in a commercial zoning, not agriculture or industrial. So economic development officer, go for planning service department. If you can, talk to your mayor, talk to the CAO of your municipality. Again, it's important to be connected to your town. Then within the municipality, you're going to go through your fire department, building department to go after your building permits, health unit. It's going to be challenged. Health unit, I kind of downplayed a little bit how difficult it was. So I appreciate that Steve kind of pointed that out a little bit more than I did. I tried to not discourage so much, but it is a challenge. It was a very challenging process, still is, even from a health unit perspective. They don't understand exactly what we're doing. And to Steve's point, like how even our production layout and system, it's very confusing. So pretty much go through all of those, and also the Ministry of Agriculture, even to, so you can send your samples, right, of your products. We're trying to also raise the bar for the vertical farming industry. So I would encourage you to approach them as well.
So before I move to Steve, Karina, there was some questions about the health unit. So you did mention it, and exactly what kind of stuff they required.
At the beginning, they didn't know what to require, so there's no requirement. So we started operating. And then eventually, if let's say you are urban farming and you want to attend farmers market, you're going to have to apply for a vendor application and go through the health unit of your municipality. We got a food premise inspection because we have this storefront and we sell food. And so we got that. And if you want to process in any way your product, you're gonna be required to have kind of a kitchen license, so have your food handler certification and have the health unit expecting you like they would at a restaurant, a kitchen operation.
Okay, great. And I did want to mention a point that I want to reiterate from my presentation that that I did in the first webinar, that all the vertical farmers that I work with, including Karina and Steve, do have a farmer's license, right? Where you get the farm number from OMAFRA after you produce a certain amount of cash receipts. So these vertical farms are licensed as such. So I just wanted to point that out to the municipality staff that are on the call, just to give them that perspective that these are considered farms as far as OMAFRA is concerned with those certificates and that farm number. To lead into this leads us into the next question about some of the things that agricultural operations get, like a reduction in electricity charges. did you find that you were able to tap into those programs, Karina and Steve? Maybe first Karina, and then we'll go to Steve for the to answer that question about electricity charges.
Not yet. We pay commercial electricity rates at this point.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, we have pretty large commercial rates. We are actually not, we have a different business model. Each of our production facilities is an independent operating company. So we're not actually running under a farm number. We do carry GFSI, International Food Safety. We don't have a storefront. So there's a different model than Karina's on that. There is value and definitively for the people on the webinar, however, to follow through on Fady's, because your labor costs are number one and your electrical costs are number two, and in our facility, when we've got hydro costs of 15 to 18,000 a month, there's definitely some ability to capture some benefits around that. It just depends on your business model.
Right. Okay, good to know.
I think you're on mute there, Fady.
Sorry about that. Maybe we'll move on to some questions for the master's students group. Some of the questions are, what made you investigate CEA as part of your research? And have you found communities that do have land use policies regarding urban ag other than Hamilton?
Yeah, so I can respond to that. I think, so the OFA brought this research project forward to us, and we're doing this project as part of a class requirement. We were able to choose this project. I speak for myself, but I think also for my group members when I say that we have an interest in agri-food systems, and the majority of my other research focuses on agri-food research as well. So this seemed like a good fit for us. And in terms of identifying other municipalities, we're still really at the beginning stages of this project. We're currently completing a literature review, trying to condense a lot of the information that we possibly can, doing sort of a jurisdictional scan to see what municipalities do have some formal policies surrounding CEA operations. And that's kind of where our survey will come in handy, is with being able to survey municipalities to see who actually has policies or guidelines surrounding these sort of operations.
Okay, great. So a couple more questions are popping up here in the chat. So we'll go to the last one. Well, the last two here. So the second last one is, are you subject to third-party audits like the greenhouse industry? Karina and then Steve. No. Steve?
Yes, we carry GFSI, so you have your audit process in there. And as well, when you're dealing with national and regional brand retailers, they will also, as part of the listing process, do unannounced spot inspections. The level of testing that goes on from water to plant tissue to air, these are weekly samples being sent both to the University of Guelph and to SGS Labs. So they're going to look at your food safety records all the way through. In our case, we have a blockchain technology that has all that traceability right on label and available to partners.
Okay, great. So one thing that I do want to focus on for the next few minutes is labor. So if you can describe your labor force, Karina and Steve, because there's a question about that. I know a lot of the vertical farmers that I work with, mainly local labor, but I want to get your perspective in terms of recruitment, what you see your needs in the future, and how you see yourself dealing with that specifically. Karina?
So our model, it's a little bit different, right? So the combination of what we were able to automate and it doesn't open too much space for, it's not super labor intensive to that point. So we don't have in each location we wouldn't have thousands of people or hundreds of people working for us. So the times we use, when we hire someone, it hasn't been an issue. I think that's one of the benefits of vertical farming. It kind of attracts employees from our perspective. It kind of within the farming industry, it's kind of sexy at this point. People want to get involved, which I think it's really exciting, to get kids involved, and people wanted to go back to farming. So when we, even before we posted our jobs, we already had people approaching us. So when we opened it, we already kind of had the recruiting in place. So again, we don't require in each location, hundreds of people. So that would be different from a greenhouse perspective or a large operation. And also the vertical farming helps attract talent.
Karina said vertical farming sexy, not the old guys in it. So there's a big gap on that one. We haven't had a challenge. If you follow the financial press, you'll see that it doesn't matter what business line you're in. In the past year, there's been a real challenge of finding labor. Our model, a couple of bullet points, if you look at the large organizations in the United States where people are going up and down on scissor lifts, we don't have that. Everything is human exposed on a plane within human eyesight. We run one shift. It's a shift of 7 people. We have occasional evening and we have weekend staff that come in. I mentioned before, labor is still your number one. We do not hire any migrant labor. We're very proud to say that in every vicinity, in every municipality, I should say, we pay at least a living wage for that municipality, and we adjust it accordingly. We have no intention of ever changing from that. Automation is significantly involved in the international vertical farming space. Our model is decentralized to have 20 facilities across the country. So no, we're not interested in spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on conveyor belts and whatnot. So we'll always have labor. To Karina's point, the upside to cannabis is that you've had some trained staff, but they don't want to work in that environment. So there's a wealth of people who have, it is a very attractive industry. People with horticultural knowledge bases are very interested. There's a labor pool that have been in cannabis that want to get out of that and actually feel that they're doing something more meaningful by growing food. And depending on your workflow processes and SOPs, you can take someone that could be, if you're in an industrial environment, I'm looking at my window, they could be working at a manufacturer across the street, or they can come in and work with plants and grow. That's an attractive benefit to them. We did an employee value proposition process with a writer from the Globe and Mail, and we're very conscious about our labor. So the answer is, while in COVID, there's been some increased challenges for everyone, the sector itself doesn't have a shortage.
Okay, so we'll move from the labor issue to getting to investors, to attracting investments, especially as a startup. For someone who has a commercial space but needs some funding, what do you recommend, Karina and Steve? Karina?
And this question can also be, aligned with our entire discussion of, the new industry, the regulations, because if you go to traditional banks, it is quite, even for the understanding, if you're trying to get a loan or something, like I don't understand exactly what you're doing, right? Because it is farming, but you don't own the land. In our business model, at least, you are not building a greenhouse that I can have as a collateral. So you're not actually farming, but you are farming. So it is, I think there's a lot to be changed in the funding scene for vertical farming too. And my assumption is that that's one of the reasons why a lot of people go towards the, angel or VCs route. So they understand a little bit more of what it's trying to be accomplished, and also because of the tech play that a lot of vertical farmers kind of have in place, which it's not necessarily our approach. So the way we did, we pretty much bootstrapped it and got a loan, different from what the person comment. BDC can give you a loan, so you can find, if you're starting something small, so you can go after, and BDC would, regardless of not being established for 2 years. So that's not necessarily correct. Kickstarter, it is. I have been seeing a lot of vertical farms, small vertical farms and small urban farmers across the globe are using Kickstarter. It is very time consuming and it requires a little bit of upfront investment, like marketing initiatives, to be successful at that. So it really depends on at what scale you want to get started. That would change a lot of, your answer and your path. If you were more like a tech play, then basic farming up front. If you're market driven, tech driven, if you want to start big, if you want to start small, it really depends on your approach to vertical farming, what your goals are. And that would change if you have IP in hands that it could be leveraged with investors. So it really depends on the case. But there are loans available. You would just have to, have a solid business plan and cash flow projections in hand, but it is possible to start small and to start with in a more traditional way, although you have to do a little bit explanation.
I'm recognizing we're getting close to the end, so I'll hit it in some bullet points. I was a senior partner at the BDC. There's some traditional investing out there. The question should really first be answered. This is not an answer specific to vertical farming. This is an answer to simply startups, no matter what it is. I've been a mentor for 20 years in that space. It comes to Karina's point, you have to have a clear business plan to be able to get there. Point two, it depends if you're looking at debt financing or equity financing. Distinct difference, and it really depends on what your model is. Point C, 2 years ago, 400 million flowed in 1 year in the US into vertical farming. In Canada, I will tell you that there's a tremendous amount for the larger commercial scaled entities. There's a lot of venture capital and private equity that was investing in cannabis that's very interested in a sector now, but it comes back to your business model and your value proposition. So the answer to the question is really as specific as the individual intent and what they're looking for. There's a tremendous amount of capital out there, but like any business, they're only going to invest in the leadership and in the business model.
So before Carolyn closes it off, I just want to get Steve. Are there any specific messages that you want the municipalities to hear? Any specific provisions or changes to bylaws that you see would benefit development of vertical farms from your experience with the multiple municipalities? And in a minute, so we can leave some time for Carolyn to close.
Well, that's why I was going to say I'm not certain that could be answered in 1 minute. I would suggest that municipalities start speaking with each other. I would suggest that their economic development offices realize that while some municipalities are going to greatly leverage what is the 4th largest growth sector in the international global economy, and recognize that through planning and building departments, they could create oil and water and drive that investment away from their community. We recognize it's new. We recognize that building codes and other bylaws have to be updated, but there has to be a proactive collaborative process to recognize that this is not a nuanced mom and pop field. This is a very highly capitalized commercial environment. The Walmart signing 400 million with plenty is an indication of it. And the only way that municipalities are going to glean that capital investment and glean those jobs is to make sure that there's a little bit more collaboration around the process.
Thanks it off. I'll hand it over to Carolyn.
Well, thank you so much. That was amazing to hear all of your experiences. Fady, thank you for moderating that session. You have brought so much expertise from into supporting this industry, and to each is to Jocelyn and Vicki and Karina and Steve and Leah, Minerva and Kaylee. We really appreciate what you brought to our discussion today. I did put up the link to Mina and Stacy's contact information. So, you know, I heard a theme over and over again from our speakers about connecting with economic development. So Mina and Stacy both work in economic development for the regions of York and the regions Durham, and I work for OMAFR, and I'm always happy to connect you to any municipality if I can. As well. So thank you. To everybody joining us next week. We've got Durham College speaking. They support vertical farming with a number of initiatives. They have an urban farm on campus. They have a new Barrett Center for Innovation Sustainable Urban Agriculture. They also have a container farm on campus as well. And they're training lots of those people with skills in horticulture. So we're really looking forward to having Durham College being our time, 11:30. It's the same link, so you don't need to register. And we appreciate all the expertise today. So thank you and have a lovely day.